Hello and welcome back to another SeedPod podcast.
This is number 3?
I think this is episode 3 if you're not putting the daily Bible readings in there. So it's just, episodes as we go.
Yes.
And today we are going to be talking about a question that it's asked quite frequently.
Yes, it is.
I've been asked several times.
For honest inquirers most of the time.
Yeah. Are all sins equal? Now, that has to be defined.
Yeah, what do you mean by equal?
Equal. A lot of times people are wondering, does God view all sins the same?
What do you mean by that?
Yeah. And so we're going to distinguish James 2 talking about one sin removes you what?
For whoever keeps the whole law and yet stumbles in one point, he's become guilty of it all. For he who said, do not commit adultery, also said, do not commit murder. Now, if you do not commit adultery, but you do commit murder, you have become a transgressor of the law, James 2, 10 and 11. And that is the truth, but that's on the bare legal side of it.
Yeah. Will one sin send you to hell?
Yes.
Yes.
The standard for the law, if you're going to go at the law, you're going to go by, here's what I'm doing, I'm going to be good enough. You mess up one time, you're done.
You're done.
I went to school with a girl who almost had perfect attendance when we got out of grammar school, which is the end of 7th grade. I, on the other hand, had failed 2 grades because I didn't go when I didn't want to, which was often. So Nicole, bless her heart, she missed one day, and I missed, goodness, probably 600, 700, I don't know. So neither one of us got a perfect attendance award, but that wasn't the whole of the story. Let's put that over here. Let's come back into academic performance and what the principals and the teachers like best. They like Nicole best.
Yeah. Well, and one has consequences. I remember one time I was out because I got mono in school, and I had to be out for like a month and a half. That makeup work was so hard and so difficult. It almost made passing classes that year impossible. So there are consequences
whether
outside,
you're guilty or not,
yes.
so to speak. You didn't get sick because you were sinning.
Yeah. Will all sins send you to hell? Yes. Can all sins be forgiven?
Yes.
Yes. Can God wipe our... So with that in mind, understanding that yes, all sins will send you to hell.
The forensic or legal side.
Yes. And one of the reasons I want to bring this up and talk about that is because why we have to discuss this other aspect, which we're about to discuss, that God doesn't see all sins the same in a different way, in the sense of their weight, their, the consequences in your everyday life and relationships and how it affects people and places and all those things.
I'm in Venetian Hill Elementary School, and I failed 2 grades, and I should have failed a 3rd, but I was getting old enough to date the teachers, and that's just not good for a grammar school, so they moved me on along. But I didn't get out of high school until I was 20. There were consequences.
Yeah.
So even when I became a serious student, sort of, toward the end, I couldn't, poof, and all the stuff I didn't get suddenly comes to mind. So there were consequences.
But I think just on the pure, if you were to be honest and you were to ask somebody, okay, in God, we're made in the image of God. We have very similar thoughts to God. To think that God wouldn't have these same thoughts. If you were to take what it would take as a human being to take someone else's life and murder, not self-defense, but you kill them out of hate. And then I took a candy bar from a store, and to say that those 2 things are equal.
Right. There's a sense in which they are not. Here's something to consider, perhaps.
Okay.
There are 6 things which the Lord hates. Yes, 7, which are an abomination to him. Haughty eyes, a lying tongue, hands that shed innocent blood, a heart that devises wicked plans, feet that run rapidly to evil, a false witness who utters lies, and one who spreads strife among brothers, Psalm 6, 16 through 19. He just can't stand that kind of stuff.
So there are sins that God understands are a sin, but he goes, okay, he understands human nature. Jesus, being a human, is a compassionate high priest, understands we don't always make the best decisions. There are times where, should I said that about that person? No, but can I be forgiven? Can I? But taking someone's life,
yes.
Devising evil.
Jesus doesn't turn the tables over in the temple every time he's there.
Yeah.
Jesus doesn't say scribes, Pharisees, hypocrites to everybody he talks to. So he has anger levels. He has things that bother him more about sinning.
And a lot of times it's because of the consequences of those sins. Like when you murder, you've taken someone's life.
Yes.
You've ended somebody's life that God created. That is much different than me saying, you know what, I don't really like Sally.
Yeah. and
Both
maybe
God,
Sally's not like
God's not wanting you to have either of those feelings.
Right.
But one is showing a level of evil and hatred where you've gotten to a point, right? Nobody just wakes up one day and I accidentally murdered that person.
Right. What was I thinking?
You know? So I want to read something from Numbers chapter 15. And I think this gives us
This has got some good stuff.
good foundational things. If one person sins unintentionally, so God's going to distinguish between the unintentional and the intentional sins. You know, if you accidentally do something, let's say you don't know the law.
You
or
just
you don't
spontaneously do it. You weren't plotting or conniving. It just, oh no.
Yeah. It says, he shall offer a female goat a year old for a sin offering. So there's still consequences to even unintentional sins. There's still a penalty.
Yes.
But watch the difference when we start switching. So, and a priest, verse 28, shall make atonement before the Lord for the person who makes a mistake. That's the way the ESV reads it. When he sins unintentionally, to make atonement for him, he shall be forgiven. You shall have one law for him who does anything unintentionally, for him who is native among the people of Israel, and for the stranger who sojourns. So even if it's a person who knows the law, he says he's a native of Israel, he's an Israelite, he sins unintentionally, or a sojourner's traveling through and he sins unintentionally. The same penalty for both. Now, verse 30, but the person who does anything with a high hand.
That high-handed stuff, that's just...
So the high-handed sin is, I know this is a sin, I'm going to do it anyway, and to heck with anybody who thinks, you know.
just try to stop me.
Yeah, okay. You know what's wrong, you're going to do it anyway. Whether he's a native or a sojourner. Now we're not. You know, this is a person who's reviles the Lord.
I have defiantly in here.
Yeah, defiant. Now yours says does anything defiantly? What does it say, whether he's a native or sojourner? Mine says reviles the Lord. What does the
Whether
NIV say?
he is a native or an alien, that one is blaspheming
Blaspheming the Lord.
It's all tough.
Because if you know that God expects something, and you say, I don't care, I'm going to do it anyway,
I'm going to do what I want to do.
you might as well blaspheme the Lord.
You may do something, and on a certain level, you even know is wrong. But, you know, immediately upon doing it, you're, I feel terrible.
Yeah.
You weren't like saying, I'm going to do this no matter what. You had a moment of weakness, that kind of thing. That's a different motivation.
That is definitely not this. And so that person shall be cut off from among his people. So both had penalties. Both were wrong.
Right.
One, sacrifice a lamb. One, the consequence is you're no longer a part of the people.
One despised the Lord.
Yeah. So when you ask the question, are all sins equal? The Lord here is saying all deserve penalty. And ultimately, we understand the penalty for all sin, Romans 3, or Romans 6:23,
sin
is death.
Law says no.
Here, give up a lamb, one, you're cut off. Look at verse 31. Because he has despised the word of the Lord and has broken his commandment, that person shall be utterly cut off. His iniquity shall be on him.
A similar thing we have in Jesus talking about a little child and the significance of a child and getting what it is to be like what he wants us to be. Truly I say unto you, unless one is converted and become like children, you will not enter the kingdom of heaven. Whoever then humbles himself as a child, he is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. That means the only person in the kingdom of heaven, the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. Whoever receives one such child in my name receives me. But whoever causes one of these little ones who believe in me to stumble, it would be better for him to have a heavy millstone hung about his neck and drowned in the depths of the sea. Stumbling blocks are woe to the world because of them, but it's inevitable that stumbling blocks will come. But woe to that man through whom the stumbling block comes. Matthew 18:3-7.
So the person who stumbles, he basically admits everyone's going to stumble.
And that's not right to stumble. It's
not right to stumble. It's wrong. But it's worse for the person who's putting the stumbling blocks in there.
Yes.
Who's causing people to sin.
Intentionally doing that.
Yeah, and causing people to Now, I want to stop just for a second. What is a stumbling block? because
it's a good thing, because a lot of people like, I don't like your tie. Oh, I will never wear it again. That person's not going to go to hell over and stuff because you don't accommodate them.
Yeah.
Stumbling, in the sense of the way the Bible uses it in many contexts, is somebody has stumbled in regard to their relationship with God.
Yeah, they are falling away, or something that is leading them to fall away, or hurt the relationship with God.
Yeah, just because you don't like something,
yes,
doesn't mean that's going to cause you to stumble.
Because most times I'm like, hey man, you're causing me to stumble every time I come here, and I see you without a tie. You're hurt. What? That's not.
So
stumbling.
you're going to give up the faith and go to hell? No, I didn't mean that. Well then
you're not meaning stumbling block. You're meaning that you're walking in and you don't like my opinion versus your opinion. Yeah. And that's, you know what, we have those personal preferences.
And we're supposed to live and let live.
Yes, that's not this. So woe to that man. So I want to kind of flip it for a second, because a lot of times we talk about are all sins equal? Well, Jesus is going to bring up something interesting to the Pharisees. Are all matters of law keeping equal?
It's every law of the same significance.
Everything we're doing. So Matthew 23, verse 23 says, woe to you scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you tithe mint, dill, and cumin, and have neglected the weightier matters of the law.
So seeds aren't as important as justice and mercy?
That's what he says. Justice and mercy and faithfulness, these you have ought to done without neglecting the others. That teaches us something.
He doesn't say forget the others and do these. He says without neglecting the others, these ought to be more weighty to you.
Yeah, and that brings me into my overall point of the fact is, because a lot of times when we have this, I think the consequences of believing that all sins are equal. Here's the consequence. Well, Edwin, since you're not perfect, you can never then come and talk to me about my imperfections.
Because sin is sin.
Because sin is sin. Whether you I'm sure you've lied, right? Okay, you're done. Don't worry about me murdering. Don't worry about me murdering this person over here.
And
you
that
can't.
You know that I'm going to be murdering in the future.
Yeah, you can't talk to me about my sin because you have sin. And actually, you know, the whole speck and plank.
Yeah.
Jesus is acknowledging
a speck is a speck.
That there are some sins that are a speck. They're small. They're little matters. They still need to be taken care of.
Yeah.
They still need to be taken care of.
But look at yourself first.
If you've got a log, you've got the weightier sin, the bigger sin. And I think there it's the judgmental attitude of looking at other people's things. And once again, when you're judging people, the only reason I should ever be coming to you for your sin is to help you. Not to condemn you, not to cast you off.
In fact, if I don't do that, I'm going to be judged by that same sensuous attitude myself. So I better be careful.
Yeah. So we don't want to ignore sins. Well, this is a white lie.
Yeah.
But the white lie principle is there, meaning there are times where people have said, like, okay,
oh, no.
I might get myself in trouble.
Oh,
Can I do it?
Go ahead.
All right.
I'll absolve you. That was a joke.
If a lady, I'm not even going to say wives, if a lady says, does this dress make me look fat?
And you say,
there are a whole lot of husbands out of the care for their wives have said, no, dear. When really, yes, it does.
Yeah, you look like a pig. Come
on.
So diplomacy.
It's not to say that that is okay.
Yeah, Paul says, I see that you're the most religious of men. Well, they're idolaters on a certain level, however, that's true.
Yeah, and we never want to excuse sin. We never want to excuse it. But we can all understand. There's actually a proverb. I should have looked at it. It just came to me. It talks about the difference between a man who steals to provide for his family.
Yes.
He still has to pay the penalty, but we can at least understand.
As opposed to somebody just going around stealing.
Besides, different than the person who just steals just to steal. So, you know, it's like if you've ever seen in those movies, and a kid's running and he takes a loaf of bread or an apple from a stand, and the guy comes out and sees, and then he sees this kid's poor, starving. You know what? Have the apple.
Go ahead.
It's not okay that you stole that.
King Kong, those of you who remember 1931, and the young lady who steals and she becomes Ray, the movie star. Anyway, but I know only 5 people out there know what I'm talking about, but it's okay.
Yeah.
They're part of the audience too.
Yep. And so what our conclusion, I guess, or our overall, will every sin separate you from God?
It's a bare legal thing, yes.
Yes, absolutely. But when you are redeemed and saved
walking in the light,
there are sins that will happen.
Mm-hmm.
But there are also sins that prove that you've left the faith.
High-handed sin. Yeah, light walkers sin.
Yeah.
John 1:7 says it. But it's the nature of it. They're not rebellious. They're not high-handed. It's, life catches you up every once in a while and you get back on the track. One thing, kind of what I was talking about a minute ago, we have figures of speech.
Yeah.
We have ways, hyperbole, where we overestimate something everybody understands, we're doing it to make a point. Lettities, where we underestimate it to make a point. And there are certain things we can say that colloquially are understood not to be taken literally.
Yeah.
And that's not the kind of thing we're talking about.
Yeah. Well, here's Jesus in Matthew chapter 15, where he's talking about what defiles a person. They're wondering why they break the tradition of the elders. They don't wash their hands before they eat. And here's what Jesus says. And he called the people to him and said to them, hear and understand. It is not what goes into the mouth that defiles a man, but what comes out of the mouth. This defiles a person. Then the disciples came to him and said, do you know the Pharisees were offended when they heard this saying? Well, what are they not offended by? Jesus says, every plant that my heavenly Father has not planted will be rooted up. Let them alone. They're blind guides, and if they blind lead the blind, both will fall in the pit. But Peter said, explain the parable. Are you still without understanding? Do you not see that whatever goes into the mouth, passes into the stomach, is expelled? But,
that's pretty graphic.
Yeah, what comes out of the mouth proceeds from the heart. This defiles a person. For out of the heart comes evil thoughts, murder, adultery, sexual immorality, theft, false witness, slander. You see the ones that he names? All these are on a level.
Core issues.
All these are on a level that that are indicative that you are not.
You're holding your hand up. I'm going to be what I am.
Your heart is not with God.
So if you inadvertently, or maybe even in a moment of weakness, take a bite of a camel, which is forbidden under the law, and that's something that goes into your. But on the other hand, you're a murderer. Do those things, are they looked at somewhat differently by God?
They are.
They are.
And so the scriptures teach us all sins separate from God. But that's apparent, easy to understand. But there are sins that will expose where your fruit, what tree you're a part of.
Is your heart in rebellion to God or not? And that not can include you're working your way back.
Yeah.
It can include you're there. But no, I'm what I am, and that's what I'm going to be.
And I'm going to just talk about one more thing in all this, is God is also extremely concerned about sins that don't just affect you, they affect other people. Consequences. Like murder, you've ended someone's life. Like David, adultery, you're
forgiven. What happens to his kids?
Yeah.
The
consequences, they have generational consequences. And so there are sins that need to be stopped, they need to be dealt with, or it will continue to perpetuate itself. And that's exactly what Romans 1 is speaking about. The fact that there is these levels that when people begin to worship the creature rather than the creator, God says, I give them over. Then they get to this sin, and once they fully embrace this sin, then he gives them over to a point where they finally get to a point where everything about their everyday life is so far from God.
Yes.
There's almost nothing redeemable, to the point where mothers don't even have a natural affection for their kids anymore.
And we see that in our culture, do we not?
Yeah. So consequences are huge. And you may think, well, if the consequences that happen here in this earth aren't as big deal to God as the consequences that happen in eternity, you don't understand the kingdom. The kingdom is in this world, not of this world, but it's in this world. It's supposed to influence this world. And so we are supposed to be people who focus on the weightier matters of law, walking in the light. Though we may sin, our sin does not characterize us, and it doesn't show and expose an evil heart.
What you just mentioned, it helps explain what Jesus said. Don't cast your pearls before swine.
Yeah.
So he says, don't judge a certain way. But he says, here's a judgment you need to make.
Yeah.
If this person is one of those people that God has given over, then move on to somebody else.
That is why one verse can never fully explain everything that the Bible has to say about something. If you don't, like, we could just go to one of these and say, hey, look, all sins are different, end of story. But all sins, the death penalty, Romans 6:20. So you've got to bring it all together. You've got to try to understand what God is doing with these scriptures, what he wants us to get out of them, and what's the best thing for the church.
Up at the top of that list is probably when Jesus is asked, what's the great commandment?
Yeah.
Well, obviously, there's a great commandment.
There's a greater
and there's a
commandment.
second that's like it. And on those two, Matthew says, all the law and the prophets hang. So those are much more significant in the overall practical scheme of things than tithing.
Because if you get those,
The rest is
tithing's
gonna-
easy, right?
Yeah.
You know, but if you focus on tithing, you can get tithing and not love. You can't get love and not tithing.
Yeah, see, look, I've got an impressive 9-1 ratio here.
Yeah. So that's kind of.
Yeah, I think we're.
I mean, there's a whole lot of more verses we can go to, but essentially, to sum it up, God does see sins differently,
He does.
and there are sins that have different consequences that will, the church needs to deal with differently.
They do.
Because we cannot have this attitude. Well, we all sin, therefore we can't talk about it.
Who am I? Well, God actually expects us to deal with people. He even has a thing where we call it church discipline.
Yeah.
You may not be able to fellowship with your brothers and sisters in Christ anymore because of the nature of your sin.
Well, Paul says there are certain sins that are leaven to the church, and a little leaven does what?
It destroys the whole lump.
It leavens the whole lump. And so we need to eradicate those sins that have the consequences to ruin congregations. And there are congregations that you know of and I know of
Yes.
that have been ruined because of one sin
That was allowed to
that was allowed to go
Spread
or
throughout.
dealt with the wrong way.
or dealt with the wrong one.
So, but that's what we have. Are all sins equal? Yes and no.
What do you mean by that?
What do you mean by that?
Yes and no.
And
Context.
I think the church needs to have these conversations. Elders need to understand these conversations because I've heard so many times, "Don't talk to me about my sin. You're not perfect, therefore you can't." That's not what God believes. What God thinks.
Jesus is talking about if somebody sins against you, go to them in private, bring people against you, take it to the church. Obviously, some things are to be talked about.
Some things are to be talked about, and some things you can just, you know what?
They're growing. They're immature right now. They're working it out. It looks good. Be patient, help them to continue their growth.
Yeah. So thank you for joining with us
Yes.
today on the SeedPod podcast. We love you and God bless.
Bye-bye.